Harry 2 years later, added the demands of parenthood to a failing marriage. Shortly after this Mallorcan holiday with the Spanish royal family in 1986, Charles went off alone to Balmoral and to his mistress Camilla. Keeping up the false image of a happy family placed a great strain on Diana. In 1987, they were apart for 3 months. Charles ignored press reports until the Queen intervened. He blamed the chill in the marriage on Diana's illness.
That was Charles's great downfall, was the belief that he could actually put out one view of his character, that this was the man who was the loving, caring man nursing the wife through a very difficult period of time, when in fact the truth was totally different. And he actually...
So Charles met Camilla in 1970 and had his baby by Diana, William, in 1982.
Believe that he could get away with it.
Diana was told to conceal the marriage rift for the sake of Queen and country. Charles, too, pretended all was well.
I'm quite sure that, as in the past has happened, and this is a history of the royal family going back 200-300 years, that the prince was expected to have a mistress. What happened, I think, with Diana was that she said, no, to hell with this, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to lay down under Camilla, or indeed lay down under Charles.
Now, Camilla's grandmother was the mistress of Prince Charles's, I believe it was grandfather or great-grandfather. So Camilla, when she met Charles, she introduced herself as the granddaughter of this woman who had been the mistress of a prior king. This probably intrigued Charles, and that's what led them quickly to a sexual relationship, in my opinion.
But I'm going to be somebody who's my own woman, and if he's going to do that sort of thing, I'm going to fight back. Quite right too.
In 1990, on their first royal visit to Hungary, recently liberated from communism, Diana was already contemplating revenge against her husband.
After the Morton book, where Diana had expressed her worries about the relationship of Charles and Camilla, that he knew perfectly well that all the palace spin doctors had been saying that there wasn't anything at all and this was all part of Diana's fantasy. Well, they couldn't possibly have said that without his knowledge and approval. For him then to come out and say he had done, it was more than hypocrisy. I mean, it was an inhuman thing to say about your wife, who clearly was under very considerable stress over this marriage. And she'd say, well, she's not very well, you know. It is 300 years of arrogant inbreeding and getting your own way that created that. Because I don't think he's a bad man, but I do think that he's a man who's just been brought up in a tradition which we are no longer prepared to accept as something that is realistic.
Now, he did admit that these people are all inbred, so that the people of the aristocracy in England are related to each other. They've been breeding with each other for many generations. That's why they all look kind of similar.
Charles believed he was the heir not just to the House of Windsor, but to 1,000 years of monarchy. His position and royal upbringing set him apart. Waiting for the throne isolated him further. His destiny was dictated by a family tradition begun by Queen Victoria and continued by her grandson George V.
What happened, though, in the beginning of the 20th century with George V and Queen Mary was that there was a decision, I think quite deliberately taken by George V, that the monarchy should adapt itself to democracy. What we're going to do, we're going to symbolise the one thing that all our people have in common. Now, the thing that everybody had in common until the 1960s was family. You all belonged to a family, you were a product of a family, you were all going to get married. Very few people didn't get married and so on. And the House of Windsor did this, and it did it extraordinarily successfully. George V and Queen Mary, and later on George VI and Queen Elizabeth, now the Queen Mother, very, very successfully embodied typical middle-class bourgeois family values. It was a bourgeois monarchy.
But some of the children rebelled, notably the eldest son, Edward, the Prince of Wales. He defied his parents' family values with a string of married mistresses. There was Thelma Furness, and Frida Dudley Ward, and Wallis Simpson, for whom he gave up the throne.
Now, there are always exceptions. There was the exception, of course, of Edward VIII, who was driven from the throne because he wouldn't fulfill this particular set of values. He would not fulfill this image of the family monarchy. But the trouble is, you see, once you set yourself that standard, if you then veer from it, you suffer, and you suffer terribly.
Behind a facade of pomp and pageantry, the royal family tried to conceal its internal divisions and the behaviour of its more wayward members.
They might have decided from the 1960s, well, why don't we admit that the family is no longer as powerful a symbol as it used to be? You know, the divorce rates are increasing, there are more broken homes, there are more illegitimate children. Let's sort of shift the image a little bit. And they didn't. What they did instead, they constantly hyped it. They hyped it within the royal family. They hyped it supremely, of course, with the marriage of Charles and Diana.
Their marriage was sold as a fairy tale.
It was perceived to have said, we are morally virtuous. And then its conduct was discovered not to be morally virtuous. And that charge of hypocrisy was thrown at it, and it has stuck, and they will find it very difficult to get rid of it.
Now, the Queen, it was always written, used to dislike blacks, actresses, and divorced women. And in her family, she ended up with every one of her children divorced, except for, I believe, Edward. So, although she hated divorces, she ended up with a family full of divorced people.
Camilla was also following a family tradition of a special type of royal service. Her great-grandmother Alice Keppel had been King Edward's mistress.
See, so this is what Camilla presented to Charles when she first met him, that she was related to a mistress of a former king that was related to Charles.
She was a very vivacious, very attractive, very charming woman, very sensuous kind of woman. There was Italian blood in her family. And so in a way she caught his eye, and he never really looked back. He was very taken with her. She was the perfect king's mistress. King Edward VII was a very restless, very difficult man. She knew exactly how to handle him. So she was, as I say, the perfect mistress for a king, for a man like him.
Edward VII, you know, the man with so many mistresses that there were allegedly sort of rules as to how the mistress should behave, and one of them sort of explained how a mistress was supposed to behave, that you curtsied first, called him sir, and then jumped into bed. There was actually a sort of court etiquette for the mistress.
In those days, there was no scandal about that kind of thing. The general public didn't know about it at all. If photographs of them appeared in British newspapers, then her face would be airbrushed out. You would see her hat, you would see her dress, but you wouldn't actually see who it was. In that way, the newspapers were very discreet about it.
Alice Keppel played the perfect wife, but rumours surrounded the birth of her second child.
There were two daughters. There was Violet and there was Sonia. And as the second daughter, Sonia, was born after Alice Keppel had met the then Prince of Wales, it's quite likely that he was her father. No one can know this kind of thing for sure, but I think it is more than likely that the future King Edward VII was Sonia Keppel's father.
If true, then Sonia passed on royal blood to her granddaughter Camilla. Born in 1947, the year Alice Keppel died, Camilla was the first child of Sonia's daughter Rosalind and Major Bruce Shand. Unlike Charles, Camilla had a happy childhood with her parents, sister and brother. They lived the charmed life of the country set in their comfortable former rectory, the Lanes, near Lewes in Sussex. Camilla enjoyed ponies, parties and fun in the swimming pool. After attending a local preparatory school, Camilla completed her education at the elite Queensgate School in Kensington.
So because Camilla was the daughter of was related to the mistress of the king, and they think she might have some royal blood from that relationship. Camilla considers herself part royal, and so that's why she snubs Meghan. She feels that Meghan is beneath royalty, and Camilla feels she is part royal because the mistress of the former king had a child who they think had royal blood.
Like many of her classmates, Camilla became a debutante in search of a wealthy and important husband. Her eventual marriage to a courtier would bring her close to the royal circle and especially close to Prince Charles. The Prince of Wales was then a young bachelor searching for a bride. He could not confide in his parents and needed an older and wiser figure to be his soulmate. His great-uncle Lord Mountbatten filled that role. In 1977, Royal Jubilee year, the Queen and Prince Philip were occupied with royal duties. Mountbatten took the opportunity to guide the young prince. Charles often visited Broadlands, Mountbatten's Hampshire home. His granddaughter Amanda Knatchbull was considered a potential royal bride. Davina Sheffield was another of Charles's girlfriends. He was also linked with actress Susan George and the aristocratic Lady Jane Wellesley.
But I believe he was at this time already having sex with Camilla.
There was no shortage of girlfriends, including Sabrina Guinness, but Lady Tryon, Kanga, was a married confidant who became a rival to Camilla. In fact, several married women became involved with Charles, but Camilla occupied a special place in his heart. She was more than a lover, giving him the comfort and warmth he had been denied in childhood. Charles and Camilla began their long affair in October 1972 after an evening out at the exclusive London.
Now, others say it was 1970, not 1972, when Charles and Camilla first hooked up. But, again, the spin doctors have confused this date because they do not want to link her children with Charles.
London club Annabelle's in the heart of Mayfair. Camilla was a wealthy girl about town. She enjoyed all the freedom of a young liberated woman of the 60s. She was already experienced with men.
Which means she was hooking up quite frequently and liberally, and with Charles.
One of the most famous romances in history started in an unremarkable block of flats in Stackhouse on Cundy Street, where Camilla lived at the time. At Broadlands, the sophisticated Camilla was enchanted by the immature young prince. Charles, said society diarist Roy Strong, was earnest with a boyish grin and a non-sophisticated sense of humour, prankish, thoughtful, kind and shy. He began a naval career that would complete his formal education and take him away from the girl he loved.
And the reason they sent him away was, according to stories, was because Camilla was pregnant. They had to get her out of town. They had to get him out of town.
He would be thousands of miles from home on the high seas as a serving officer when he heard that Camilla was engaged to Andrew Parker Bowles.
And that engagement was fixed by the Queen. She wanted to get Camilla a husband so that he could claim the baby that she was having, and they wouldn't be able to attach that baby, which turned out to be, I believe, Tom, to Charles. They would play that the baby was Parker Bowles' baby, but in reality it most likely wasn't, because Camilla felt she was a royal. Parker Bowles was enticed to marry Camilla, I believe, because he wanted status, he wanted to be upgraded in the royal ranks, he wanted additional money that they were willing to provide to him in order to marry Camilla to get her away from Charles, and he would again, he would be privileged to a lot of social activities with the most elite in England if he married her. So he was willing to marry her even though she was not having his children.
They had a high society wedding in July 1973. Camilla had won the most handsome man in her social sphere. Charles feared he had lost her forever.
Really, the big mistake was not to have married her in the first place. That, of course, has been his life all the way through. He's not been able to make up his own mind. He's dallied and dithered. Listened to the Duke of Edinburgh. Disaster.
But he couldn't marry her because she was already pregnant. And according to the rules, he had to marry a virgin. So Camilla, by getting pregnant, had knocked herself out of the list of women that could be eligible to marry Charles.
For anybody, I would have thought. No other human being lives like that, and unfortunately it was his undoing very early on. Should have married her then.
The Parker Bowles lived at Bollyhide Manor in Wiltshire. To be close by, Charles bought Highgrove. Under the cover of royal engagements, Camilla turned up regularly. Charles's relationship with a married woman was acceptable in royal circles. Charles and Camilla also met at Hall Place, the Hampshire home of Camilla's grandmother Sonia, the probable daughter of Edward VII. Enter now Charles's innocent fiancée, Lady Diana Spencer. She knew nothing at first of his secret life. An inexperienced 19-year-old, Diana had accepted Camilla's friendship at face value. No one would tell her the truth. The royal family and her own relatives remained silent about Charles's mistress. As her relationship with Charles progressed, Diana grew suspicious of Camilla's influence over him.
So by the time Diana had her first child, Camilla had had her second child, a little girl.
Charles left for a pre-arranged tour of Australia shortly after their engagement in 1981. Diana's distress was passed off as the anxiety of a young girl facing the absence of her future husband. However, the awful truth was beginning to intrude on her happiness. Diana had heard Charles take a last-minute phone call from Camilla before they left his office in Buckingham Palace. Knowing that Camilla was in constant contact with Charles, Diana's tears fell as his plane took off. In Australia, Charles and Camilla's calls were bugged. The incident was dismissed as a hoax. But the press was suspicious. When Charles entertained a blonde, assumed to be Diana, on the royal train in sidings near the Parker Bowles home, it made the front page news. There were official denials over Diana's presence. She knew it wasn't her and must have suspected the woman was Camilla. Diana's love for Charles blinded her to reality. And in July 1981, Charles and Diana were married at the wedding of the century. Diana was the most beautiful bride you could ever imagine, said a commentator. But Diana knew Charles's secret. Few noticed the mounted escort, Camilla's husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, head of the Royal Household Cavalry, an officer.
And that was the job that Parker Bowles was given as part of his deal to marry Camilla and be the beard, to kind of hide the fact that he was not really acting as her husband. He had never really had sex with Camilla. He was merely hiding Camilla as the mistress of Charles. Parker Bowles had a girlfriend elsewhere who he was not able to expose because he was supposed to be married to Camilla.
Officer and a gentleman, his discretion was assured. After 2 nights at Broadlands, Charles's former love nest, the newlyweds honeymooned on Britannia. Charles took with him souvenirs of Camilla.
The time of the honeymoon was both a romantic time, but it was also a time of extreme bitterness and painful memories. There was one occasion on the Royal Yacht Britannia where she opened Charles's diaries, and 2 pictures of Camilla fluttered to the floor.
Diana later informed Morton, her biographer, that she had suffered dreadfully from bulimia on her honeymoon cruise. She blamed Charles's infatuation with his mistress. Diana's obsession with Camilla grew to the point of psychological illness. At Balmoral later that summer, Diana hid her mental state from the cameras. She knew her husband could not give her the love she craved, and that he would always hunger for the woman he could not have.
Prince Charles has a really very interesting chart, because everything you look at in regard to women and relationships says, I want what I can't have. I have this romantic dream, and that I want what's just out of reach. Again, he shares that with a lot of men. He's not very different there. So it may be that had Camilla been the wife, that he would have naturally looked for something that would give him just that extra sense of, if only I could have this person, then my life would be perfect. What is fascinating is that Camilla's sun and her moon, two very key components in an astrological chart, are in exactly the same sign as Diana. So, I mean, you have some very similar connections from chart to chart. So I often felt that had he married Camilla, Diana might have been the great love of his life.
The Queen did not invite Camilla to Balmoral, her home in Scotland. It was left to Charles's grandmother, the Queen Mother, to entertain Camilla and her husband at her home at Birkhall, a convenient...
I just want to say about that last lady, she said that if he had married Camilla, maybe Diana would have been the person he would have chosen as a mistress, but that wouldn't have happened because Diana was a teacher, and she was much more restrained sexually. Camilla was the wild girl, and she was doing everything like hanging from the chandeliers. So no, he would not have picked Diana as his mistress. She was much too reserved.
Convenient location close by for Charles and Camilla to meet. Diana believed that she had allowed a special telephone line to be installed so that Charles could phone Camilla without fear of being bugged. In time, Diana grew to distrust and dislike the Queen Mother. Outwardly, for the Prince and Princess of Wales, the royal show went on. Their dancing displays enchanted Australians, first in 1983, and in 1985 when Diana stunned onlookers by wearing a royal heirloom as a jewelled headband. And again in 1988. Later, Charles returned home to Camilla and the more traditional role of a prince with a mistress.
I think Charles's problem is that he appeared early on to be a very new age, modern man in touch with the values of his own generation. As he's grown older, it's become clearer that he's actually a very traditional royal. And in this department, he's a very traditional royal in that he famously said to Diana, "Do you expect me to be the first Prince of Wales in history not to have a mistress?" when she started kicking up a fuss about Camilla. Diana turned out to be not the brainless bimbo that he thought he'd married, but a thoroughly modern woman who stamped her foot publicly and became a potent icon for feminists suddenly, but also a rather traditional woman in that she wanted a strong family unit with strong family values. He was betraying both those things. And I think as the first Prince of Wales to grow up in the mass media age, the intrusive age, he's not just out of touch with his own times, he always has been, but he's trying to live an impossible contradiction in an age when you just can't get away with that. So I don't think the deception would be any easier now in an age when people openly live with people who are not their wives. Only one of those people wants to be head of the Church of England, that's Prince Charles, and he has to live by those rules.
Before Prince Andrew's wedding to Sarah Ferguson in 1986, Charles dismissed Diana's bodyguard for falling in love with his wife. Yet he and Camilla were having a full-blown affair. Royal rejoicing hid the family's concern. Charles and Diana hardly spoke during the entire wedding celebrations and came out of Buckingham Palace separately to wave off the Yorks. Holding page boy William, Diana knew that Charles was lost to her. Behind the joy for her friend Fergie, now a royal bride, Diana was already consulting astrologer Penny Thornton as she feared for her own future. She suspected